After my husband's funeral, my daughter drove me down a seaside road and said, "This is where you get off. The orchard and business are mine now." I stood in the salt-scented wind, clutching my bag as she drove away without looking back. No phone, no money. And that's when I realized I wasn't alone. I was free. But she had no idea what I'd done before her father died. I'll tell you everything. First, let me thank you for watching. Stories of Auntie May 365. Please subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We might give you a shout out in our next video. Today's special mention goes to Agnes Bulma from London, UK. Thank you for being part of our family. Now let me tell you everything. I was born Eleanor Rose Thompson, became Eleanor Whitmore when I married Henry in 1979, and stayed that person until 5 weeks ago, the day after we put him in the ground. I'm 71 years old with hands that still remember how to braid apple branches in spring, the way my daughter Vanessa used to love watching me do every Sunday afternoon, and how to twist ribbons for harvest fairs, the way my son Ethan asked me to teach him when he was 7. I'm sharing this so you understand that before everything fell apart, I was just a grandmother who thought she had raised decent children. Henry fought liver disease for 18 months, the kind that eats away at you, slowly giving you time to say goodbye, but never enough time to really accept what's coming. We kept it between us at first, just the two of us. Our children were living their busy lives, Vanessa, with her wellness studio business in Portland that always seemed to need emergency money from Dad, and Ethan, with his tech startup dreams in Seattle that never quite worked out, but always needed another loan from us. They don't need this worry right now. Henry had whispered one night, lying in our bed, the pain medicine softening his voice. Let them enjoy their lives without this darkness hanging over them. I agreed because I loved him deeply. But I should have known better. I should have remembered who our children really were when they finally came home to our little farmhouse on the cliffs of Hollow Bay, Maine, the same home where they'd grown up, where Henry and I had built Whitmore Orchard and Garden, from a few apple trees into the most trusted nursery and cider farm in 3 counties. They didn't come to comfort us. They came asking questions about money. "Mom, I'm just being smart here," Vanessa said, using that fake sweet tone she'd learned from her yoga teacher training. We were sitting in our sunroom, Henry sleeping upstairs after another rough night. "The medical bills must be huge. Have you and Dad thought about selling this old place? The business is probably too much work for you both now." Vanessa had run away to Portland at 19, saying small-town Maine was too dull for someone with her ambitions. She'd only visited on holidays when she needed something, usually staying at fancy hotels, because she was allergic to our barn cats. But suddenly, while her father was dying, she became very interested in the orchard that had embarrassed her through high school. Ethan showed up 2 days later, driving a fancy car he couldn't afford and wearing clothes that cost more than our monthly grocery bill. 6 failed ventures in 10 years. Each one started with his father's money. Each one abandoned when it required real work. But he held Henry's hand the night before he passed and read to him from old books, which is why I still wonder how things went so wrong afterward. The funeral was simple, just how Henry wanted it. He was buried in the small cemetery behind St. Anne's Church, where wildflowers were beginning to bloom. I stood between my children as they lowered my husband into the earth. Vanessa's arm around me felt cold and stiff. Ethan cried real tears into a tissue I gave him from my purse. "He's in a better place now," Pastor Jenkins said softly, and I hope that was true, and not just words people say to make death less frightening. Henry and I weren't deeply religious, but we'd gone to church enough that the pastor knew to talk about Henry's love for growing things rather than heaven and angels. What I remember most about that day was how quiet everything felt afterward. The house seemed too big, with people dropping off food and whispering about Henry's kindness, his generosity, how he'd helped the McCarthy family when their roof leaked or donated cider to the town fair every fall. Nobody mentioned how he'd built our orchard from nothing while raising 2 children, who seemed to have forgotten everything he taught them about working hard and helping others. That evening, I fixed up the guest rooms and told Vanessa and Ethan as the last visitors left tomorrow, we can look through some of your father's things together, maybe share some memories. Actually, Mom Vanessa said, setting down her wine glass in a way that reminded me of her father when he was calculating something. Ethan and I have been talking, and we think it's better if we take care of business quickly. We both have to get back to our lives. Take care of business, I asked. The house stuff. Ethan explained, not looking at me directly. The orchard. Vanessa and I need to figure out what happens next. I'd expected sorrow from my children, maybe stories about their dad. Instead, I got a business meeting. Vanessa opened her laptop right there at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd celebrated birthdays, harvests, and their graduations. Dad talked to me about this last month. She said, still not meeting my eyes. He was worried about you running everything alone. The orchard needs new equipment, new ideas. This house is too big for one person. You're my age. I said slowly, the words bitter in my mouth. I've helped run this orchard with your father for 42 years. And you've done amazingly well, Ethan said in that smooth voice he used when pitching investors. But now it's time to think about your future mom. A senior living place would give you friends activities, people your own age. I have friends. I have activities. My voice sounded strange even to me. This is my home. It's our family home, Vanessa corrected gently. And Dad left the business to Ethan and me in his will. He wanted us to take care of you, but he knew the orchard needed younger people to run it. I stared at my daughter, this stranger in linen yoga clothes, who thought she understood soil seasons or the trees that fed us for decades. Show me this, Will I said quietly. She slid some papers across the table, not from our longtime family lawyer's office, but printed on Vanessa's business letterhead. Henry's signature looked wrong, somehow too neat and steady for a man whose hands had trembled for months from medication. You made him sign this while he was sick, I said, my voice trembling with something between fury and heartbreak. He was thinking clearly, Vanessa insisted. He wanted us to have a new beginning with the business. There's a developer interested in buying the land. After the funeral, silence clung to the walls like damp sea air. Hollow Bay had always been quiet in spring, but that evening the stillness felt like a punishment. I moved through the house as if it belonged to someone else. The kitchen where Henry's laughter used to fill the air, the dining table still set with untouched casserole dishes left by kind neighbors, the framed photos that suddenly looked like artifacts from another life. Upstairs, the scent of his aftershave lingered. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the indentation his body had left in the mattress, terrified that even that would fade with time. For the first time in 43 years, the house felt both enormous and unbearably small, full of memories but emptied of purpose. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but no tears came. Grief had frozen somewhere deep inside like seawater beneath a layer of ice. When I finally stood to change out of my funeral clothes, a folded envelope slipped out of Henry's jacket pocket. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The handwriting was his, uneven but familiar. For Eleanor. Open when the house feels too quiet. I sat down again, my pulse suddenly racing. Inside was a single page. If you're reading this, my love, I'm already resting. Please remember, not everything that looks loyal truly is. Trust the soil you've worked, not the hands that take from it. There's one deed you must never forget, the 5 acres under your maiden name. Keep it safe. It's your anchor. My breath caught. He knew. He must have seen the way Vanessa's eyes lit up whenever we talked about selling the orchard, the way Ethan avoided real work but always asked for loans. Henry had been gentle but never naive. The letter didn't make me cry either. It only deepened the stillness inside me, a silence that was no longer grief alone, but something heavier, colder, like standing in the eye of a storm that hasn't yet begun to spin. The next morning, the light that poured through the window was too bright, almost intrusive. Vanessa was already in the kitchen, dressed impeccably, her tone brisk. "Mom, we've been thinking," she said, stirring her imported coffee. "It's time we made some decisions." I didn't answer right away. I poured my own coffee, the regular kind she always said smelled cheap, and sat across from her. "What decisions?" I asked. Ethan appeared then, his face pale from lack of sleep, or guilt, I couldn't tell which. "About the orchard." "About you," he said softly. Vanessa opened her laptop again, that shiny silver thing she treated like a sacred object. She had color-coded charts, bullet points, even a digital presentation. "We have an offer," she said. "Platinum Properties wants to buy the land. They'll pay more than $4 million. We can all start over." She smiled like she was offering me salvation, not betrayal. "You mean you can start over?" I said. "Mom, don't do this." Vanessa sighed as if I were the difficult one. "You can't handle this place alone. Dad wanted us to take care of you." I looked at her carefully, the perfect makeup, the soft linen clothes, the calm, rehearsed voice. Everything about her screamed control. But underneath it, there was hunger. I'd seen it before, the same glint she had when she was 16 and lied about stealing money from the register to buy her first designer shoes. "Show me Dad's will," I said quietly. She hesitated, then slid the same forged papers across the table. Seeing Henry's forged signature again broke something in me that even his death hadn't. I traced the pen strokes with my finger, steady, perfect, unnatural. "You made him sign this while he was dying," I whispered. "Mom," Ethan began, but Vanessa cut him off. "He wanted to. Don't twist this into drama." Her tone was ice. For the first time in my life, I saw her not as my daughter, but as a stranger, a woman shaped by greed and self-justification. Henry's letter burned in my pocket like a live coal. I knew what he meant now. Not everything that looks loyal truly is. I stood slowly, ignoring the tremor in my legs. "You'll excuse me. I need a moment alone." Vanessa looked annoyed. "We're not finished." "Oh, I think we are," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I went upstairs to our bedroom and closed the door. The ocean wind whistled faintly through the old window frames. I took out the letter again and read it one more time, this time letting the words truly sink in. "The 5 acres under your maiden name. Keep it safe. It's your anchor." It felt like he was speaking through time, giving me a map when I didn't even know I was lost. I opened the drawer behind the mirror, the one Henry had built decades ago for emergencies. Inside, the papers were still there, the deed, the passport, the small envelope of emergency cash he insisted we keep after our car broke down years ago. My fingers brushed the documents, and something inside me, something faint but solid, came back to life. I wasn't ready to fight yet. Not then. I was still too hollow. But for the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel completely powerless. When I came back downstairs, Vanessa and Ethan were whispering. They stopped when they saw me. "Are you okay?" Mom, Ethan asked carefully. I smiled faintly. "I will be." Vanessa crossed her arms. "We're leaving for Portland tomorrow. We'll finalize everything next week. I'll email you the paperwork." I nodded as if agreeing, though my heart had already retreated somewhere far away to the orchard, to Henry's voice, to that quiet promise in his letter. That night, after they'd gone to bed, I walked outside. The orchard stretched before me, silvered under the moonlight. Rows of apple trees stood like silent witnesses. The air smelled of salt and earth, the scent of our whole life together. Somewhere out there, the sea whispered against the cliffs, steady and eternal. I thought of Henry's last words, of the gentle way he'd once said, "The land remembers who loves it, Elle." I pressed the letter to my chest and whispered back, "Then let it remember me." The stars blurred above me, not from tears, but from exhaustion, too deep for crying. And yet beneath the numbness, I felt the first flicker of something small and sharp awareness. The kind that grows roots in silence before breaking through the soil. Tomorrow would bring confrontation lies, and maybe even betrayal beyond what I imagined. But tonight, in the hush of Hollow Bay, I stood between what had been and what was coming, and the air was so still I could hear my heart finally start to beat again. They left me in silence, but the silence was where I began to hear myself again. If someone you love betrayed you for money, would you stay silent, press 0, or fight back, press 1? The next morning, I woke before the sun. The world outside was gray and suspended sea mist clinging to the apple trees. The air thick with that briny smell Henry used to say smelled like work and life. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the letter still folded beside me like a living thing. I don't know how long I sat there before I heard it, a faint buzzing sound coming from Henry's old jacket hanging by the door, his flip phone. He'd refused to give it up for all these years. The screen was dim, blinking one new message. My breath caught. I pressed play. A man's voice, low and urgent. "Henry, it's Robert. I got your note. Platinum's not who they claim to be. Don't sign anything, they're already blacklisted in 2 counties. Call me before you talk to your kids. This could get dangerous." Then static. The message ended. I sat frozen, the phone heavy in my hand. Henry had known. He'd tried to protect us, maybe even to warn me, but he hadn't lived long enough to finish what he started. That was the moment the silence inside me cracked. The numbness that had weighed me down since the funeral didn't vanish, it ignited. I made a list that morning, small and neat, on the back of a grocery receipt. 1. Find Robert. 2. Call Daniel Cho. 3. Lock the accounts. 4. Protect the land. It wasn't rage that moved me. It was something older, steadier, the kind of quiet fire that had built Whitmore Orchard and Garden from 3 apple trees and a dream. By noon, Vanessa and Ethan had packed up and left for Portland. The house was mine again, stripped of voices but rich with ghosts. When the sound of their car faded down the coastal road, I walked to the greenhouse. The air inside was warm and damp, the scent of soil rich enough to breathe in like medicine. Henry used to say plants could feel your energy. They grow faster when you're at peace. That morning they must have felt the storm in me, because the leaves seemed to tremble. I didn't weep. I rolled up my sleeves and began trimming the overgrown branches, one deliberate snip at a time. With each cut, I whispered under my breath, "For Henry, for truth, for what's ours." That rhythm kept me from collapsing. Later that afternoon, I called Daniel. He didn't sound surprised to hear from me. "Eleanor," he said gently, "I was hoping you'd call. I've reviewed the document your children gave me. It's completely fraudulent. And now that I hear about that message from Robert, who I asked, Robert Kim. He used to partner with Henry decades ago on the early greenhouse projects before he moved to California. Big agricultural consultant now. If he warned Henry about Platinum Properties, you should trust him." That was all I needed. By evening, I'd found Robert's company online and sent a short, polite email, "Henry's wife here. I think we need to talk." I didn't expect a reply so fast, but within minutes, my screen pinged. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've been waiting to hear from you. I feared the worst after Henry stopped returning calls. You were right not to sign anything. Platinum is dangerous. I'll explain when we speak." The word dangerous shouldn't have comforted me, but it did. It gave my anger direction shape. I printed Henry's letter and tucked it into my purse with the deed. The weight of those papers steadied me. They weren't just documents anymore, they were proof that my life wasn't over, that I still had something worth defending. That night, Hollow Bay slept, but I didn't. I sat in the dim glow of the kitchen, the tide whispering through the open window, and began reading everything I could find about Platinum Properties. The internet is cruel but honest and full of stories like mine. Elderly homeowners tricked into signing over farmland, fake wills, predatory loans. I found one case after another, stories of quiet people pushed to desperation, and sometimes stories of those who fought back. That's when I stumbled across a post tagged Reddit revenge stories. It was an older woman, maybe my age, who'd been conned by her nephew into selling her bakery. She didn't take it to court. Instead, she rebuilt from scratch, turned her new shop into a town legend, and made the nephew's betrayal his own social humiliation. Her words burned into me. When people think you're finished, that's when you get to decide what your ending really is. That night, I understood my story wasn't ending at all. It was beginning again. The next morning, I called Daniel back. Freeze every business account, I told him, and I want to know everything Vanessa and Ethan have touched in the last 3 months. Are you sure you want to do this now? He asked. I'm done being sure, I said. Now I'm being certain. He laughed softly. You sound like Henry. Good, I said. He was right about everything. Then I hung up and called Robert Kim. His voice was calm, steady the way men sound when they've seen too much of life to panic easily. Eleanor, your husband, tried to protect you, he said. Platinum has been buying up coastal properties under false LLC names. They approach grieving families right after funerals. It's a pattern. I have 5 acres under my maiden name, I said slowly, with the main well and greenhouse. Robert paused. Then you hold the one card they need most. Keep it safe, and don't tell your children you know. After that call, I walked outside again. The mist had lifted, and for the first time since Henry's funeral, sunlight touched the orchard. The trees glittered with dew like small diamonds. I thought of all those Reddit revenge stories I'd read, people finding courage in broken places. Maybe that's what we all are, I thought. Broken places still growing. I closed my eyes and whispered into the wind, You left me with ashes, Henry, but there's still fire in them. For a moment, I could almost feel his presence, that quiet, patient strength that had steadied me through decades of storms. The kind of strength that doesn't shout, it simply endures. And there, between the scent of apples and sea air, I made my decision. I would not beg my children for love they no longer carried. I would not surrender the land that held our lives. And I would not be silent again. This was no longer just a story of loss, it was a story of reckoning. One that would one day sit beside all those Reddit revenge stories as a testament that sometimes revenge isn't fury, it's justice, wearing patience. I picked up the pruning shears again and looked toward the distant cliffs. The sea glimmered like a blade. Let's finish what we started, I murmured. The fire was always there. It just needed silence to find its oxygen. If this story lit a spark in you, tap the like. It helps Granny's voice grow among other souls who still believe in justice. By the 3rd morning, the numbness had cooled into something else, a kind of precision. The fire was still there, yes, but it no longer raged. It was focused, contained like a blade that had been sharpened on grief itself. I used to think anger was loud. It isn't. Real anger is quiet, methodical, the kind that plans before it strikes. I made tea instead of coffee that morning, the way Henry used to when he needed to think clearly. The house was still the tide far below, whispering against the rocks. The scent of apples drifted in through the open window. It reminded me that even decay had its purpose. My first call was to Daniel Cho. Eleanor, he said, I've spoken with the county office. The injunction's been filed. The sale is frozen for now. Good, I said, calm. Now let's tighten the circle. He laughed softly. You sound like a general. Maybe I am, I replied. But this isn't war. It's housekeeping. When I hung up, I went through the old roll-top desk Henry had used for bills and paperwork. He was a creature of habit, dates, signatures, color-coded folders. He used to joke that one day the whole orchard could be rebuilt just by following his notes. He wasn't wrong. Under the folders, I found a tablet, not Henry's, but Vanessa's. She must have left it behind in her rush to claim victory. It still smelled faintly of her perfume, something expensive that never suited this old house. The device was locked, but Henry had been a practical man. He'd once written every family password in a tiny notebook for emergencies. I found it easily taped under the drawer. The tablet opened on the 3rd try. Her emails were still there, a flood of contracts, property details, and then a thread that stopped me cold. From Vanessa Holt to Matthew Grant, Platinum Properties, Matthew, once it's signed, will finally have the funds to move to Vancouver. Ethan won't be a problem. I'll keep him distracted with family guilt, his reply. You always know how to handle people, Ness. Just make sure your mother doesn't start asking too many questions before the funeral. After that, it's our world. My hands went cold. The words blurred. Before the funeral, they'd planned this even while Henry was still alive. She wasn't just greedy, she was complicit. I scrolled through more messages. Photos of Vanessa and the man, champagne dinners, business meetings, trips labeled as retreats, all proof that this wasn't just fraud. It was a conspiracy built on deceit and lust. I emailed everything to Daniel with a single line. Add this to the file. It's time they faced what they built. When I pressed send, the house seemed to exhale. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't always bring relief, but it brings order. And order was what I needed now. By noon, Daniel called back. Eleanor, this changes everything. We can charge them with collusion, not just forgery. I know, I said quietly. But not yet. I want them to think they're still safe. He hesitated. You're playing a dangerous game. I'm just finishing one. Henry didn't get to end, I said. That afternoon, I walked to the edge of the orchard where the old storage barn sat. The boards were weathered and soft. The door groaned when I opened it. Inside, the smell of sawdust and old cider barrels filled the air. I began sorting through boxes labeled 1981, 2005, each one a chapter of our life receipts, customer lists, donation records. Henry had written everything down, even notes of gratitude from families we'd helped during hard years. One envelope caught my attention, addressed to Mr. Robert Kim, Sacramento. Inside were letters from Henry, handwritten, thanking Robert for advice on conservation easements and legal protections for farmland. Henry had been preparing the orchard's protection years before he fell ill. I smiled, faint and proud. He'd built this place to outlast us all. When I stepped outside, the late afternoon light was bright against the sea. The air tasted of salt and resolve. I called Robert next. I found your old letters, I said. Henry was working on something long before any of this. Robert's voice was soft. He wanted to turn the orchard into a heritage trust. It would have made it impossible for developers to build anything without community consent. That's what we'll do now, I said. We'll finish his paperwork, not theirs. He paused. You're stronger than I expected, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm not strong, I said. Just finished pretending to be weak. That night, as I reviewed documents with Daniel over video call, he looked at me through the screen with something like awe. Most people your age would have broken down by now, he said. Age doesn't matter, I replied. It's clarity that counts. He nodded. Then keep your clarity sharp. I will, I said, sharp as a blade. After he signed off, I stared at my reflection in the laptop screen. The glow made my face look paler, older, but the eyes, they were the same eyes that had once stared down. Droughts, storms, and the chaos of raising 2 children on a farmer's budget. Those eyes were awake now. Outside, the wind rose. The orchard leaves shimmered silver under the moonlight like countless mirrors reflecting something hidden but strong. I picked up Henry's letter again. Trust the soil you've worked, not the hands that take from it. I whispered back. I'm learning, Henry. Finally learning. Before bed, I wrote in my journal something I hadn't done in years. Not grief, not rage, just strategy. Tomorrow 1. Meet Robert to finalize Conservation Trust. 2. Call Naomi Blake, the journalist. 3. Visit the county archives for environmental records. 4. Pretend to be frail when Vanessa calls. The list made me smile. Once I would have been afraid to confront my children. Now I was preparing to let the truth speak in court, in the papers, and in their conscience, if they still had one left. Somewhere deep down, I knew this was no longer just about family or land. It was about integrity. The thing Henry built. The thing they tried to bury. I closed my notebook and glanced once more at the dark window. My reflection stared back steady, cold, and unflinching. That's when I thought of those old online threads again, stories of families torn apart, of mothers fighting back, of resilience, wrapped in sorrow. People call them Reddit family tales, now little windows into how people reclaim their lives from betrayal. Maybe one day someone will read mine there too and realize revenge isn't fury, it's intelligence, remembering its worth. I blew out the candle, and the room fell into darkness. But my mind stayed clear as glass. Wisdom isn't loud. It's the sound of a blade sliding quietly from its sheath. If you felt that cold clarity tonight, tap, like it helps Granny's voice reach more souls who still believe in truth beyond betrayal. The following week, Hollow Bay seemed to breathe differently. The fog rolled in softer, the sea calmer. Even the orchard felt lighter, as if the land itself knew the tide was turning. I'd spent the last few days gathering every piece of evidence, every document, every photograph connecting Vanessa and that man from Platinum Properties. Daniel was moving quickly. Petitions filed, statements, notarized, county officials finally paying attention. Robert Kim had flown in from Sacramento, sharp suit and calm eyes. When he stepped into my kitchen, he took off his hat and said, "Henry would be proud, Eleanor. You've done more in 2 weeks than some lawyers do in a lifetime. Pride doesn't bring back decency," I said, setting tea on the table. "But maybe justice can." He smiled faintly. "Justice is coming." That same afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. The envelope was hand-addressed in soft, cursive, no-return name, just Hollow Bay postmark. Inside was a short note on lined paper. "Mrs. Whitmore, you don't know me, but my grandparents worked at your orchard for nearly 20 years. My grandfather used to tell me that Mr. Whitmore treated his workers like family, brought them soup when storms flooded the fields, helped repair roofs when money was short. When people in town heard about your children trying to sell the land, they were heartbroken. Please know we're on your side. The orchard isn't just your home, it's part of our town's story. With love and respect, Lily Harper, age 24." I read it twice, maybe 3 times. Her words hit deeper than any court ruling could, because while Vanessa and Ethan had forgotten where they came from, this young woman, someone who'd never met me, still remembered what Henry stood for. It reminded me that justice isn't always punishment. Sometimes it's remembrance. The next morning, Daniel called. "Big news," he said, barely hiding his excitement. "The county's environmental board is siding with us. They've confirmed your husband's trust paperwork qualifies for conservation protection. Platinum's project is dead in the water." I didn't smile. "Not yet." "Vanessa and Ethan?" I asked. "They'll be served legal notice today. The developer's lawyers are withdrawing support. Without that, their case collapses. Let them see what honesty looks like," I said softly. After the call, I walked outside. The sun broke through the mist, casting golden light across the orchard. Dew sparkled on every branch, nature's confetti, celebrating in silence. By afternoon, reporters began calling. The local paper wanted a quote. Rebecca Martinez from the Bay Weekly arrived in person, recorder in hand. "Eleanor, the town is buzzing," she said, smiling. "You've inspired half the county. They're calling you the widow who saved Hollow Bay." I laughed quietly. I don't want to be a headline. I just want honesty to have a home again. Rebecca nodded, her voice softening. "Then that's exactly what I'll write." She asked one last question before leaving. "What made you fight back, Mrs. Whitmore?" I thought for a long moment. Because love without respect is just weakness, and respect begins with telling the truth. That evening, as the sky turned, Amber Roberts stopped by again. He carried a thick folder under his arm. "The state attorney wants to open an inquiry into Platinum's dealings," he said. "Your evidence started something bigger." I raised an eyebrow. "Bigger?" "They've found similar cases in Washington and California. Elder exploitation, property fraud, even blackmail. You're not just saving your orchard, you're exposing a network." I took a deep breath. "Then it's worth every sleepless night." Robert's tone softened. "But there's still the matter of your children. Do you want them prosecuted?" The question hung between us like fog over the bay. I looked out the window where the orchard shimmered beneath the stars. "Not yet," I said finally. "Let them see what happens when you stand against decency. Let them live with what they've done before the law takes its turn." He nodded. That's Grace Eleanor. Hard-earned, but real. 2 days later, I was sorting through old photos for the town's historical committee when my phone buzzed. Unknown number, Mrs. Whitmore. The voice was young, nervous. "This is she. It's Lily, from the letter." I smiled despite myself. "Lily Harper, thank you for your words. You reminded me why I fight. I just wanted to say—" She hesitated. "If you ever reopen the orchard for community work again, I'd love to help. I grew up hearing stories about this place. It'd mean something to continue that." For the first time in months, warmth filled my chest. "Then we'll make room for you," I said. "We'll plant something new for your generation." That night, I sat in Henry's old rocking chair, the fire flickering softly beside me. The letter from Lily rested on my lap. For so long, I'd seen this battle as punishment for my children, for myself. But now I understood it differently. This wasn't vengeance. It was restoration, a reclamation of balance. Henry used to say, "You can't control the storms, Elle, but you can build stronger roots." And that's what I'd done, built roots out of paper trails and truth. The following morning, I visited the churchyard where Henry was buried. Spring flowers covered the ground, just beginning to bloom. I knelt beside his grave, brushing away a few stray leaves. "Well, my love," I whispered, "it's almost over. The orchard's safe. The people remember. Even strangers know your kindness now." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of apple blossoms down from the hill. For a heartbeat, I could almost hear his voice, that gentle chuckle he always had when life surprised him. I smiled. Yes, I kept my promise. On the walk home, I passed the general store. People waved old friends, neighbors' faces that had once looked at me with pity, now shining with quiet pride. It wasn't victory that I felt. It was peace. The kind that comes from knowing you've done what's right, without cruelty, without hate. That's when I realized justice doesn't have to roar. Sometimes it whispers through the respect of others, through the laughter of new workers in the orchard, through a young woman's letter thanking you for not giving up. That night I added one last note to my journal. Grace isn't forgiveness. It's the strength to stop the hurt from spreading. I closed the book and let the house rest around me, quiet, breathing, alive again. Somewhere beyond the window, a single light glowed from the barn where the new volunteers were organizing tools for the weekend cleanup. The orchard was ready to grow again. And so was I. When you fight with anger, you burn the field. When you fight with grace, you make it bloom again. If this story touched your heart, give it a quiet, like, not for me, but for everyone who still believes kindness can be stronger than greed. The letter from Lily still sat on my kitchen table the morning Vanessa returned. The day had been clear, sky blue, and merciless, the kind of morning that makes even the sea look honest. I was sorting through invoices for the orchard's new community trust when I heard tires on gravel. I knew the sound before I looked up. Vanessa's car, the same black sedan she'd driven the day she left me on the coastal road. The engine cut off. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. I didn't move as she walked up the porch steps. When she knocked, I simply called doors open. She entered cautiously, as if stepping into sacred ground. Her hair was perfectly styled, but her eyes, those once fierce blue eyes, looked tired, lined with something she probably couldn't name, yet guilt or fear. "Mom," she began softly, "we need to talk." "We do," I said. "But first, I want to hear you say why you're here." She hesitated, then exhaled. "You think you've won. Everyone in town's talking about how you saved the orchard. But you don't know everything." I said nothing. Silence has power, something Vanessa never understood. She set her designer purse on the table and pulled out a small voice recorder. "I have something you should hear," she said. "Dad wasn't the saint you make him out to be." Her words hit like cold water, but my face didn't change. She pressed play. Henry's voice, unmistakable, rough, weary, recorded near the end of his illness. Maybe it's time, Vanessa. Maybe your mother doesn't need this burden after I'm gone. Selling might be best. She clicked the recorder off. See? She whispered. He wanted the same thing I did. I looked at her at the desperation trembling beneath her calm facade. You recorded your father while he was dying. Her chin lifted defensively. I was trying to protect the family. I thought, no, I interrupted quietly. You thought of yourself. Like always. Vanessa flinched as if struck. I took a slow breath. Do you even know why your father said that he was thinking of me, of sparing me the fight he knew was coming? But he changed his mind. I have the letter he wrote after that day, the one he hid in his coat pocket, the one that said to protect the orchard at all costs. She blinked rapidly, unsure whether to believe me. You can show that to the police, she said finally. They'll say both versions exist. They'll say Dad was confused. This recording changes everything. Unless what she swallowed hard. Unless you give me half. The house, the profits, something. Mom, please, I've lost everything. My name, my business, my friends. And now I said you've come to lose what little dignity you had left. Her voice cracked. You think I wanted this? I was trying to be strong like you to survive. I felt the smallest ache deep in my chest, not sympathy exactly, but recognition. She was my daughter, after all. And this hunger to control, to survive, was a shadow of my own strength turned sour. Still, something inside me had already broken beyond repair. Sit down, I said. She obeyed, wary eyes darting around the familiar kitchen, as if searching for mercy. You were born right here in this house, I said softly. I still remember the smell of apple blossoms the day we brought you home. Your father held you like you were made of glass. Do you remember how he used to braid your hair before school? When I worked the early shift, Vanessa looked down. I remember. Then tell me, where did that girl go? She didn't answer. I leaned forward. I forgave you once when you lied about the scholarship money. I forgave you again when you borrowed from the business and never repaid it. But what you did this time wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks. Mom, please. No, I said, voice steady. Forgiveness is gone now. I buried it the day you left me on that road. Her sob was raw, small, human, the sound of something breaking that had been hollow for too long. I stood and opened the door. You can keep your recording, I said. Play it for whoever you want. The truth will still stand. You can't rewrite a lifetime with one moment of weakness. She rose slowly, wiping her face. You'll regret this. No, I said. You will. As she reached the doorway, I added quietly, and Vanessa, if your father could see you now, he'd still forgive you. That's who he was. But I'm not him. She froze her back to me. I know, she whispered. That's what scares me. Then she left. The gravel crunched under her tires again. The sound faded down the road, the same road where she'd abandoned me months earlier. The circle had closed. That night, rain fell softly on the orchard. I sat by the window, the voice recorder on the table beside me. I pressed play again just to hear Henry's voice one last time. Maybe it's time, Vanessa? He sounded tired, fragile, a man trying to protect the woman he loved from a storm he knew she couldn't stop. I smiled faintly through tears I hadn't realized were falling. You were wrong, Henry, I whispered. I could stop it. I did. I didn't erase the recording. I didn't destroy it either. I placed it in the same metal box where his letter lived, two truths side by side, because life was never simple enough for just one. In the morning, I walked through the orchard. The air was crisp, the scent of wet earth rich with renewal. A few new workers were pruning the younger trees, laughter echoing softly across the rows. As I passed them, Lily waved from a distance. Morning, Mrs. Whitmore. Looks like we'll have a strong harvest. I smiled. We will. She didn't know that inside me, another kind of harvest had already begun, the quiet acceptance that some loves don't heal. They fossilize, harden into lessons. I paused by the oldest tree near the property line, the one Henry had planted the year Vanessa was born. Its roots ran deep, deeper than the lies, deeper than the pain. Kneeling, I pressed my hand against the trunk. "It's done," I whispered. A single apple fell, landing softly beside me. Mercy, I thought, is not always beautiful. Sometimes it just means letting go, not to forgive, but to stop carrying the weight of what forgiveness no longer deserves. Some wounds don't heal with love. They heal when you finally stop bleeding, for people who never looked back. If this moment touched your heart, press like for every parent who's ever had to choose, morning light slipped through the kitchen curtains, soft and golden, turning the steam from my tea into ribbons of gold. The world outside was still wet from last night's rain. The orchard glistened as if washed clean, every leaf, every apple, every memory shining again. It had been 3 months since Vanessa's visit, 3 months since I'd buried forgiveness beside the tree Henry planted for her. And in those months, something unexpected had taken root inside me. Not joy, exactly, but something steadier. Peace. I still woke early out of habit. I still checked the soil, the irrigation, the books. But now the work felt lighter. The land no longer carried grief, it carried growth. Lily and the new workers had turned the old barn into a community hub. Children came on weekends to learn about planting families, brought picnics, and the laughter that filled those fields was the kind Henry always wanted to hear again. Sometimes I'd stand by the fence watching them and feel a warmth that no amount of betrayal could steal. Because this was what survival really looked like. Not revenge, not justice shouted from rooftops, just life continuing quietly, beautifully. One morning, Rebecca Martinez stopped by with the newspaper. Her eyes sparkled as she held it up. "Front page," she said proudly. State officials confirmed Platinum Properties executives were arrested for fraud and elder exploitation. Their case began with you, Eleanor. I took the paper, scanning the headline. There it was. The widow of Hollow Bay Sparks coastal reform. I never meant to start a movement, I said softly. Rebecca smiled. That's usually how the real ones begin. She closed her notebook. So what will you do now? I looked out the window. Live, I suppose. Grow things again. Teach a few lessons not about business, but about love and limits. She nodded and before leaving said, You should tell your story publicly someday. People need to hear it. Maybe one day I will, I thought. Maybe not in a courtroom, but somewhere gentler. That afternoon, I walked to the hill where Henry was buried. The grass had grown thick and green, dotted with daisies. I placed a single apple beside his stone one from the new harvest. You'd like this year's crop, I said. Balanced sweetness. Good roots. The breeze shifted, carrying the faint scent of salt from the ocean. I closed my eyes and listened to it, not searching for signs anymore, but simply being. For so long I'd lived with the noise of anger and loss. But now silence didn't hurt. It soothed. Rest easy, I whispered. I've kept my promise. The orchard's alive. The children, they'll have to find their own peace now. Back at home, the kitchen radio hummed softly with old jazz, Henry's favorite. I sat by the window with my journal and began to write. Some endings don't need applause, I wrote. They just need quiet, the kind that comes when you've done what's right. The pen moved easily this time, no shaking, no hesitation. For the first time in years, I wasn't writing from pain, but from understanding. I'd learned that love and disappointment can live in the same heart, and that forgiveness once buried can still bloom again, not for others, but for yourself. The orchard had become my mirror, pruned where it needed cutting, blooming where sunlight finally reached. 2 weeks later, the Whitmore Orchard Community Program opened officially. The mayor came, reporters came, and so did families from every corner of Hollow Bay. Even Robert Kim flew in standing beside me as we cut the ribbon. He leaned close and said quietly, "Henry would be proud, not just of the orchard of you." I smiled. He always believed in new seasons. During the ceremony, Lily spoke to the small crowd, her voice trembling with emotion. This orchard isn't just land. It's proof that decency still matters, that roots run deeper than greed. Mrs. Whitmore didn't just save a business, she saved what this town stands for. Applause followed, gentle but sincere. I stood there not as a victim or a widow, but as someone who had endured the storm and found her way to stillness. Later that night, after everyone left, I stayed behind to lock up. The stars hung low and bright.